So who is my father? My father is a very obviously big figure in my life. I've looked up to him since I was a very young age, and I began reading a lot of what he writes from a very young age. And so when, for many years when he was developing a lot of his philosophies on wealth, I was reading them, and I was reading them as they were published, and they definitely influenced my own ideas of wealth and kind of how I've pursued my career and how I invest and take care of my own family. Yeah, so I think that the most important concept I think that my father teaches is about the difference between looking wealthy and being actually wealthy. And when you grow up as a child in a place like South Florida, which is full of lots of people with big houses and very expensive cars, I remember being very young and pointing out a very expensive car driving by, and I said, wow, that person must have a lot of money. And my dad said, well, you never know who's renting and who's owning. Which, you know, taught me an important lesson about never looking at things and taking them at face value. You know, another thing I think I would point to is, you know, living wealthy is also about developing a value system of what's important to you. We're sitting here in a 25-acre botanical garden and arboretum that is my father's swan song. It's his legacy. It's what he wants to leave for the world. And with all the money that's been invested into this botanical garden, which is meant for the public, my father could have been flying on private jets his entire career and things of that nature, but he's always looked at things like that and thought that they didn't make sense and they were expensive, and for the quality of, in terms of the improvement of your quality of life, it's really insignificant. Whereas, you know, creating something like this for your family and for the public and to give something back, I think that's something that people that are actually wealthy can do. If you're not constantly spending your money on frivolous things like luxury vehicles and buying expensive watches or clothes or these things that aren't as important to living wealthy and having financial security and being able to always take care of your family. Well, I have plenty of stories like that. Yeah, so I'll start with an early story, which was, you know, I always showed a very early aptitude for writing. And I remember very clearly that I figured out that if my father knew I had a writing assignment for school, I'd spend about 10 hours in the evening with him going through every single line very carefully and being very critical with all my writing. And this is at age like 6 years old. And asking me, why wasn't I writing better? And I needed to be better and blah, blah, blah. And so when my mom wanted me to do my writing assignments, I started listening to her, because if she told my dad that I had the writing assignment, I would have to spend 10 extra hours with him yelling at me about it. And the difference in the grade was only maybe an A- to an A+ if he helped me. So my mom would yell at me and go, if you don't do your chores, I'm going to tell your father about that writing assignment you have to do. So that was kind of an early story that comes to mind. Another story that comes to mind is I in high school was very, very rebellious. I had dreadlocks, a very crazy hair down to my waist, and I was probably doing all sorts of things I shouldn't do. But my father was never, he would come down hard on me, but he always gave me the freedom to make my own mistakes and figure out for myself what made sense for me. So yeah, he was always a good guiding force for me, but he always gave me the freedom to make mistakes and learn things on my own as well. The other thing I would say about my father is that you know, my father now is a very different man than he was 30 years ago when he was when he was when he was my age. Back then, he was like a giant bull, and everyone that was in his way was going to get out of the way. And I think that as he aged, he's gone from being showing other people how to build businesses by literally forcing his way through anything he needed to be successful, and now he has a much more educational approach, and he's a softer, more kindly person today than I think if you ask some of the people that worked for him 20 years ago, they would have a different opinion. Yeah, so when it comes to wealth building, when I was a teenager, I knew that I wanted to be a writer for a living, but my father asked me if I knew how much most writers made for a living. And when he told me, I realized that didn't sound like a very good life. So then he told me about something called copywriting, and occupation where you could write and actually make money. And so I kind of knew I always wanted to be a copywriter. And so after college, that's what I did. Is I learned to write, and I started out as a copywriter, and ever since then I've taken all the money that I make, writing copy, and I'm very conservative with how I invest my money, and most of the stocks I own are all legacy stocks. I operate with the same philosophy he does. So it's hard for me to think of I don't think I've ever made any investing mistakes. In fact, he actually scared me out of buying Facebook at the IPO, which I still hold against him, because I would consider that company to now be scratching at as a legacy. I don't know if it technically qualifies as a legacy stock by Sean, but I think it's almost there. But yeah, I can't think of an example of a story where that happened. But my father, I've worked alongside him now for many years, and he's complimented me many times over the years. He says I'm a better copywriter than he ever was, that I think I have a different way of dealing with people than he does. I have a little bit more of a softer approach, a little bit more of a persuasive approach. So he's always been complimentary of the traits I have that he feels that he lacks, is probably a good way to express it. And I have many of those. I think the most important things that I learned from my father that I want to teach my own children are that the most important qualities that people can have are being kind, independent, and have humility. And I think that if you follow those three rules, you'll live a pretty good life. If you make sure that your children are independent, and by independent I mean both financially and emotionally. By kind, I mean having good manners and the traditional etiquette that most civilized countries believe is civil, a civil way to go about your life. And yeah, I think that and humble, obviously, and I think that this is a great trait that I often see in Japanese culture, is a great humility, regardless of how much somebody might have achieved. I've never seen my father speak down to anybody in my entire life, no matter who they are or who he is or what walk of life either of them came from. And I think that's the most important quality I want to teach my children. The second most important quality is definitely how to manage money and investments and understand risk versus reward, and why it's so important to be careful and not reach for the shiny new story of whatever the story of the day may be. If 2013 it was 3D printing, and 2014 it was pot stocks, and 2017 it was crypto, and so you can see these bubbles, and it doesn't mean that those technologies are not real, And it doesn't mean that those technologies aren't going to change the world. AI, for example, is absolutely going to change the world. But it doesn't mean that you should buy a company trading at a valuation where it's going to take 100 years for you to earn back your money if the stock collapses. So I think just teaching them to be conservative and to start as early as possible and understand the difference between money you saved and money you've invested and what the money is that you need to run your life, your costs. So I think if you have a good hold on those things, you can live a really good life. Yeah, so the reason why I choose primarily invest in legacy stocks, and to be clear, I have about half of my my investments in legacy stocks, and then I have another half of my portfolio that's about 50-50 split between stock in my own publicly traded company that I work for, and then half of it is just in Berkshire Hathaway, which I would also consider to be a legacy stock. So probably about 75% of my equity exposure is to legacy stocks. I'm a 35-year-old man, so I probably could have been a little bit more aggressive over the last 10 years, but at the end of the day, I never ever think about my portfolio and I never have to worry about it. I've never sold any share. I think I sold Microsoft early on and that turned out to be a mistake, so I own it now. But yeah, I don't think I've really sold any legacy stock ever that I've ever bought. And that's how I like to buy stocks. I like to buy stocks that I can hold forever. That's what Warren Buffett says is the best holding term is forever. And I think that if you think about investing it like you're really owning a piece of the company, you want to be in companies that have strong fundamentals, that return dividends, that have a history of buying back shares at the right time and not the wrong time, which is the way most companies do it, is they usually buy back shares at the wrong time to try and boost their their executive compensation and things like that. So to me, it's about having peace of mind. Bonds, I've never understood why anyone would invest in bonds when they yielded 2% or whatever they have been for most of my adult life, the last 15 years or so. And I'm glad I wasn't, because when the Fed raised rates in the 2020, I believe beginning in January 2022, they caused a 47% decline in the long bond, which is a US 30-year treasury bill. So bonds never made sense to me. But I have other investments that are in equity. I have about, probably 5% of my net worth is tied up in gold. So I own St. Gaudens MS64, or specifically the collectible type of gold coins I like to trade, because when you own those and the price of gold goes up, they are like a leveraged version of gold, so they go up much higher than the price of gold. But when people aren't interested in gold, like 6 years ago when I bought all my gold, there's a very small premium between buying an ounce of gold and buying these coins. So if gold was trading at 1900, I maybe paid 2100 for these coins. But when gold rallies 50 or 60%, these coins can go up 10, 15, 20. So I hold gold, I hold silver, and I also invest in what I would consider investment grade art. So I have another 5 or 7% of my portfolio in investable art. So I invest that way because it feels safe to me. I feel that if there's a market crash or something unexpected, I have enough gold to pay for all of my expenses for probably 2 or 3 years. And then that allows me, and I also always keep about 2 years of expenses in cash on hand as well. And then other than that, I just invest in legacy stocks and my own company stock. And I've never had an interest in trying to reach for big gains because I just don't think that people realistically will ever achieve that kind of outcome. So I think as a little kid, when my father was always starting new businesses. I mean, I can't tell you how he's wired to start new businesses. It's like part of his DNA. And I always found it to be interesting. I would sit in his office and listen as he did business. I would go on business trips overseas with him, and I would always be in the room with him, seeing what he was doing, talking to his partners, seeing how they made decisions. And yeah, it was always exciting and fun and interesting, and I've been close to those businesses my whole life, and I've worked for some, I've interned at other ones, and yeah, I think it was always exciting then. I think now that I run 3 separate nonprofits here in the United States for my family. I also help my father manage a lot of his personal and business affairs. And I also help consult for Agora's executive board. So I'm very involved. So now I'm trying to keep my dad from not starting new businesses. So whenever I hear he started a business, he knows to do it secretly behind my back, because I worry that he's working too much at his age. But yeah, so I'm always having, it's like, I don't know if you know the game Whack-A-Mole in the United States, where the mole pops up and you have to hit it before it goes back down. I'm always playing Whack-A-Mole with businesses my dad's creating all over the place all the time. Yeah, exactly. There'll be 4 more businesses that I'll have to try to manage and figure out what's going on, and yeah. So I always thought that I would end up doing exactly what my father did. And I think for a long time I felt a lot of pressure to do what my father did. But funny enough is I followed his kind of wealth building principles, and I find myself in a position where I don't need to manage a ton of people to make a great income and provide for my family. And so I think actually I've just got into an age where I realize I don't have to be just like my father to feel like a successful child. And so, I'm independent. I can't quit my day job, but if I wanted to, I could quit my day job and sell my house and probably not work again. So I think that is the greatest gift my father could have given me, is teaching me how to do it on my own. And I'm confident that if I lost everything today, I could go out and do it again. When I think about what will happen when my father isn't here anymore, I imagine the funeral, and I imagine it being one of the biggest funerals I've ever seen, because I think that my father has impacted so many people in his life, and he's helped dozens and dozens of entrepreneurs build independent businesses. He has had thousands of employees that have worked for him that, whether or not he was nice or, 100% of the time, they all have a great respect for him and a great appreciation for what he's done for them, because my father's always deeply believed that it's always better to be more fair than being less fair. And so if you're making a deal, you should always feel like you're getting a little less out of it than the other person, because you don't ever want anyone to feel like you were scamming them or trying to get one over on them. So I imagine that my father's greatest legacy is everything he's done for the hundreds and thousands of people out there who have either met him and gotten to work with him, or simply the people. I run into people all the time at conventions and conferences that'll come up to me and tell me how my dad's book changed their life or helped them quit their job and build a $100 million business. And so hearing things like that, I think, from people he's helped over the years will be will be, for me, the greatest legacy he's given me, because I'll get to continue to hear about him and hear how he changed other people's lives even after he's gone.